Hey, welcome back to Zombie Tactics. Today, a little different video. Definitely not talking about zombies, not talking about guns, knives, preparedness, anything like that, although I think you'll find that it does have a little bit to do with all these things, because we're going to talk about fighting your fear. And in relationship to this, I'm kind of using the example of Captain Ahab in the book by Herman Melville, Moby Dick, where the great white whale, Moby, is a representation of fear, or something that you cannot overcome in your life. Certainly it's that for Captain Ahab, and it's something that defines his very life, because it is something that he cannot overcome, the great white whale. Well, for people who have irrational fears, phobias, things like that, those phobias are a great white whale for them. And I have one of my own, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. By the way, if this video comes across a little bit self-indulgent, I apologize for that, but I do think that it does have some bearing on the kinds of things that we talk a little bit about on my channel. If you have a phobia, you know what it's like. It's an irrational fear. It's not a rational thing based upon some legitimate concern that you have about your circumstances and something that might harm you or cause you great bodily harm or death. It's an irrational fear. Now, for instance, I have a rational concern having to do with being stung by bees, because I'm just deathly allergic to bee sting venom. I've got about 20 minutes before I'll go into anaphylactic shock, and during that time there will be welts appearing all over my skin, and that's exactly what's happening inside of my airway at the same time if I'm stung by a bee. And my airway will close off and I will be unable to breathe shortly after I pass out from anaphylactic shock, and then eventually I'll die shortly thereafter, of course, because I'm not breathing. So that's a legitimate fear, being scared of being stung by a bee. Strangely, though, I don't have a problem being around bees. I've not been stung by a bee for 30 years. I've learned how not to tick them off. And I've actually had bees land on my hand, and I don't do something stupid like blow them off or shoo them off, because that just ticks off the bee. Now you're going to get stung. That's an example of how being so afraid of something, you might actually cause the thing to happen in the first place, kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But that's not an irrational fear. That's not a phobia. A phobia is something like you're so afraid of spiders, arachnophobia, where just because you see one out in the garage, maybe even something not even particularly deadly like a daddy longlegs, you're absolutely certain that that spider is going to come and get you. Or you're afraid of snakes or something like that. There's actually this weird fear that people have, I forget what it's called. Well, what they're afraid of is they're afraid that a duck is watching them. Go figure that one. But those are irrational. Now, when you take a look at these kinds of fears, and my great white whale that I'm going to talk about in a second, they are always having to do with a common factor. They are not being afraid of the thing itself. They cause the person psychologically to react in a way that what they're doing is they're losing control of their circumstances. So you're afraid of that spider, you're afraid of that snake, you're afraid of that duck, you're afraid of heights, whatever. But what's really going on is psychologically, rather than being afraid of falling or being afraid of the spider biting you, you're afraid of, it causes a fear reaction based on the idea that you don't feel like you're in control of your circumstances, or you feel like you're out of control in your circumstances in a way that just gets to you. So that's really what a phobia is all about. Now, my phobia, the one that I've had for a long time and will probably continue to have for the rest of my life, has nothing to do with being afraid of heights, although it might seem like it. It has nothing to do with being afraid of being over a large body of water. I used to have lunch on the 11th floor of a building that I worked on all the time, on a terrace where I would sit with my back right up against the railing, that I could easily, if that chair tipped over, I'd fall 11 feet, 11 stories to my death probably. But I was never afraid of that because I'm not afraid of heights. However, I am deathly afraid, I have a phobic reaction to suspension bridges. And the thing about suspension bridges is not that you're high, and it's not that you're on a bridge, and it's not that you're over a body of water or you're way up high over the land. It's that whether it's imaginary or it's real, I feel the bridge moving and twisting and swaying in the wind. So what do you think my great white whale would be? Well, here it is. It's the Golden Gate Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge is one of the largest suspension bridges in the world. At one time, it was the largest suspension bridge in the world, and there are even little displays there in the Golden Gate visitor area to the bridge, where they tell you all about how the bridge does in fact sway and twist in the wind and does all this kind of thing. So whether or not my perception of it is imaginary or not, that's what's going on in my head. Now, what else is going on in my head, and this was happening on this day, is all these things start going through my head about how I'm out of control. And believe it or not, most of them have nothing to do with me falling off the bridge or someone else falling over the bridge to my death. We're not even actually on the bridge yet, but I can feel the vibration caused by the bridge swaying and the traffic going by. And I have to confess, it's kind of freaking me out a little bit already. So let's just see how this goes. It has to do with things like, well, my wife was along with me and she's carrying the camcorder and she didn't have the strap on her wrist. And so I'm afraid she's going to drop the camcorder. It's going to go over the side of the bridge. And oh my gosh, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm afraid that the people that are coming by me on bicycles, one of them is going to fall off of their bike over the railing because it's certainly low enough that this could happen. Humorously, there are all these little signs along the way that say things like don't panic, or, you know, it'll get better, or there's a crisis prevention hotline. And as you might guess, what I did on the 5th of May, 2012, my 52nd birthday, was I walked across the Golden Gate Bridge, my white whale. Children are walking across this bridge and they don't have a problem with it. People are riding bikes across it, old people. It's no big deal. People walk back and forth that bridge every day. It's not a big deal for them. But for me, it's a phobia. And it's something that I've not been able to do before. I've tried on other occasions to walk across the Golden Gate Bridge, and I got about 20 yards out onto the bridge, and I had to sit down and grab onto something and hold onto it and sit there and catch my breath and then walk back off the bridge. And I've always felt a tremendous sense of defeat because of this, because I don't like to be ruled by my fears. So I decided for my 52nd birthday, I'm walking across the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, I didn't think this out very well, so all along the way I'm having all these little mental reactions. We get all the way to the other side of the bridge, and we discovered that our plan, which was to get on one of these buses, which we figured, oh, you must be able to get a ride on one of these buses back across the bridge. We found out that it was like a $50 bus tour, and it didn't really let you off on the other side of the bridge at the little park visitors area. So in addition to walking across the Golden Gate Bridge, which takes about 30 minutes, now I had to walk back the other way to get back to our car, or spend like $100 for the two of us to take this bus ride. So I walked back the other way as well. And surprisingly, it wasn't as bad that time. And so what I think is, what I've heard from psychologists is probably true, that with phobias, exposure to the thing that you're afraid of, you eventually get to the point where it might be manageable. Now, I don't ever envision a point in time that I would be able to walk across a suspension bridge like the Golden Gate Bridge and not have it affect me on some level. But I do know now that I can do it, and that overcoming those kinds of fears is something that I want to do for the rest of my life. And maybe that's just sharing a little bit of life philosophy for you on the channel today. It's my 52nd birthday today, and that there is my white whale, and today I beat it. That's Zombie Tactics for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.